program today is going to be given by the St. John's Riverkeepers. If you don't know, the Riverkeepers are a nonprofit group that's associated with the American Riverkeepers, correct?
The Riverkeeper Alliance.
Riverkeeper Alliance. And their job is basically to protect the St. John's River. We have with us Lisa Rinaman. She is actually, her title is St. John's Riverkeeper. So she is the Riverkeeper. It's all up to her. And also Jessica Finch. I could try to find a Lynch on the line. Jessica Finch, who is the Putnam Advocacy Outreach Coordinator, correct? Something like that.
Something like
Okay. She is also the council president of the Blackett Town Council. So she's right here from the Fruitland Peninsula. But you guys go ahead.
Thank you. I'm gonna grab the mic and work my way around. Oh, sorry. Okay, no more wires crossed. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lisa Rinaman, and I'm very happy to be with you all today. As BJ said, I'm the St. John's Riverkeeper, but I'm part of an organization called the St. John's Riverkeeper, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit that's part of an international movement called Waterkeeper Alliance. We're about 23 years old, and we've been around, and our whole focus is to protect and restore the St. John's River. And you can't protect and restore the St. John's River without also protecting its springs, its tributaries, and its 8,800 square mile watershed that drains into the river. And so it's a big job. It's a weighty title, a heavy title, but it's about working with people who love our river and who love our communities that depend on healthy waterways. And so it's a real honor to be here with you today to talk about one of our priorities, as well as a little bit of the history of the Ocklawaha River, the history of the St. John's and the Ocklawaha, what it means to this community, and also the potential future of what this riverway can mean if we're all working together to restore the Ocklawaha River and the natural connection. Next slide. So as I mentioned, our mission is to defend the St. John's River and advocate for its protection. Next slide. Most of the work we do is either getting people out on the water to have fun and to experience our waterways, or to get pollution out of the St. John's, or to restore its natural ability and healthy to a healthier state. That's one of the most important projects that we've been focusing on, is restoring the natural connection between Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. John's River as the Great Florida Riverway. This restoration project is one of the most important projects economically as well as environmentally speaking, and we're going to talk a little bit about why we believe that is based on more than 2 decades worth of data. It's also the largest springs restoration project. It's the largest resiliency project, the largest habitat for manatee project. So there's so many different things in this that we're excited about sharing with you today. But before we talk about the future of the Great Florida Riverway, what this can mean to our communities, we want to go back in time and talk a little bit about the history. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Finch to talk a little bit about the history of the Ocklawaha and what it means to our communities here in Putnam County. Jessica.
Thank you so much. So as we were preparing this presentation today, we thought it would be appropriate to speak on the history of the Fruitland Peninsula and the waterway that we call the St. John's, the Ocklawaha, and Silver Springs, and how they were already a big part of fishing and recreation in Putnam County before the dam was put up in 1968. So just some history from my own perspective. My grandmother used to come down to Willaca and stay at the Way Wonder Fish Camp, which is located, or was located, just south of where Sunset Landing is now located. My grandparents fell in love with the area. They ended up purchasing what they called their own fish camp, which was just a little mobile home on the western side of the Dunn's Creek Bridge. Back in the 80s, they purchased a home on Lake Crescent, which is where the just to the south of the Latter-day Saints Church. There were a lot of orange groves there, and they sold that just a few years back, and they have since passed away, but that has been a part of the history of our family here in this area. As you can see from this, that was the original Colonial Inn. It was built in the 1920s. It, at that point, catered to elderly people coming down to Florida. We had snowbirds back then too, and they enjoyed the Colonial Inn. It was later renamed the Sportsman's Lodge, and that photo or that ad was put out in 1965. So you can see back in 65, it was called, the Willaca area was called the Bass Capital of the World, as of Putnam County as well. You can see all the fish to your right. So there was definitely a lot of sports fishing going on in the Willaca area. If we can move on just to the next slide. But going back even further, the Ocklawaha has always been part of the recreation for our area. Before the invention or before the railroads came down here, the method of travel was the steamers. And Hubbard Hart, when he was in his 20s, and this is before the Civil War, he first traveled upstream on the Ocklawaha and was just amazed by the natural beauty. He felt like he was in a completely different world. And when he got to Silver Springs, that was even more so. I mean, he was just amazed by the natural clear water, the prolific fish, and he decided he could make some money on that by creating tours on the Ocklawaha. So what he did is these are two of the later boats that he had, but before the Civil War, he did have boats and he did arrange trips starting in Palatka, stopping in Willaca, and then heading up the Ocklawaha to the Silver River. If we can go right on. That was one of the later steamships that went up the Ocklawaha. One thing that happened though to slow him down was during the war, obviously he couldn't take people up the Ocklawaha. So what he did, because his boats were able to travel the Ocklawaha and the Union's boats were not, he became kind of a blockader, and he provided, he worked on behalf of the Confederacy and provided supplies, and they could not follow him up the Ocklawaha because of the shallow water and because of the winding tour, or the winding river that it is, if you've been up there. But after the war, first of all, let me go back. So during the war, he was making $200 a day leasing out his boat to the Confederacy. He racked up about $11,000, and then he talked them into paying him to clean up all the debris in the river for another $4,500. And then after the war, he switched sides and began working for the Union and did the same thing. So if we could switch back or switch to the next one. He saw a way to make money. He also planted orange groves along the whole path. And he took Harry Beecher Stowe up the Ocklawaha, and her descriptions of the Ocklawaha and the experience that she had, as well as the experience she had when she saw the springs, made other people want to see and travel. So back even then, there were snowbirds. They came down based on her writings. They came down to visit. And these people had been to Europe. They had been all overseas. They had been all over, but they felt that this was an experience that rivaled something out of Africa or somewhere. There was nothing that they could compare to the Florida wilderness.
The reason that his steamboats were so unique was the way they were designed. They didn't have a paddle wheel on the outside, they had a paddle wheel on the inside, and they opened up a door and it would actually be able to propel and not snag on all the stuff. Yeah. In fact, the Oka Humpty, the one that is the one we had the model of at the archives. If you guys looked at that one, it was a really big cool one. If we had a scale model of it, that someone would love this. But it was a unique design of the ship. That was the only reason they could go up and down. I think very narrow and had a paddle wheel on the inside, which was very cool.
it's the writings, when you read about the writings that Harry Beecher Stowe and some of the other writings of one of the New York editors from the paper of Brian, the descriptions that they describe how the Aqua was just make you want to actually go back in time. And I mean, that's how I felt when I read it. If we could go on to the next slide. So just briefly before we actually talk about this one, so the steamships, though, that kind of died out in the 20s. But in the meantime, basic fish camps were popping up along the area in the St. John's, and not so much in the Ocklawaha, but the St. John's, I believe Crescent Lake as well. But something that also came about from the whole Ocklawaha history was they were milling cypress, and there was a big cypress sawmill in Palatka, and it's, you can still see where it was today. In fact, we did a tour this weekend with Sam Carr, and he pointed out where it was actually located. So that was a huge business. The cypress lined the Ocklawaha. They had an area called the Cypress Gate. We don't have a picture of that, but just centuries old cypress lined the Ocklawaha. We still have some cypress out there now, of course, but it's not to the same degree. This picture shows, it looks like you could have taken that from my house or Crescent Lake, or probably anywhere on the St. John's or anywhere on Crescent Lake, but that is actually something else. So if we could go to the next slide, that is actually Blue Springs, and Blue Springs is located on the south end of the Rodman Reservoir. And it is, from you can see from the previous picture, it is covered by a weight of water. You can't even tell that's a spring. But the picture that was just that was a painting done, and that was done back in when that picture was painted.
I don't remember. I think it was right before the dam went in.
Okay, so it's an older picture, but that Blue Springs was a 3rd magnitude spring, tons of fish, just a beautiful place that we no longer have access to. And this article was written right before the dam went in, and it's just such a memory from someone who actually went out and stayed at Blue Springs and fished at Blue Springs, knowing that the dam was coming. And it's a really touching article, and we did bring some copies of that for you all, so I think you would really enjoy reading it. That is one of the 23 springs that are currently buried under the weight of Rodman Reservoir and the expanded Ocklawaha. And I'm going to turn this back over to Lisa.
Thanks, Jessica. This article was actually, I think, 1965 Field and Stream article, so it was a national article. And we do have copies in the back. We'll email copies of this to you, as well as some other really beautiful historical memories of what the Ocklawaha and all the springs looked like before the dam. You can't see the caption on the photo from in the back. I can hardly see it from here, but it says the character of the Ocklawaha, a beautiful wild river, will be destroyed by the Cross Florida Barge Canal. And this was them saying goodbye, not only to the spring, but all the amazing fishing trips that this gentleman had had with his family. Next slide. And that's exactly what happened. Right after that photograph, that article was written, the Cross Florida Barge Canal was put in. Began in 1968. And this is a section, if you're driving over Highway 19 and you look west, you'll see this section that was actually still there today and looks very similar to this. And for them what the plan was originally was to put like a Panama Canal across the St. Johns River. This was started and actually was on the books for decades. And Bob can probably tell you more of the background of all the decades of wrangling trying to get this started.
Early 1800s, they had it on. They wanted something similar to it. And then it went on.
And then there's all sorts of interesting stories, from who stopped it to the railroads being involved, as well as the newspapers. But eventually in 1972, it was stopped by President Nixon. Part of it was due to environmental impact. Part of it was due to the cost skyrocketed. I hear the trains were upset about it. So there's a lot more. In fact, there's an entire book written about it called Ditch of Dreams that goes into more detail about all the different, the history as well as today. Next slide. Is for them to actually, to get water into that canal, they had to go out and destroy about 8,000 acres of forested floodplain, some of the best floodplain that you can have. And they did it, this picture didn't have a person, if you had a person by it, it looked like about an inch. These were these huge crusher monsters that they would go out and destroy and crush the trees down so they could actually make way for the pool and connect it to that canal. We have a picture in a moment of what it looks like now during the drawdown, because they didn't crush all the trees. Some of the trees, they just flooded and then they died off. And now when they do the drawdown, you actually see a sea of trees that only come up, I don't know how many feet they come up, Bob, any idea?
Probably 10 or 12.
About 10 or 12 feet, but we'll show you a picture of that. But it was very devastating to a lot of people that cared about this waterway in this forest, just like the gentleman that wrote the article for Blue Springs. So why was the dam built? I mean, it was built, it was put in place in 1968 to back up water into the canal. It wasn't built for water supply or for flood protection or power generation. It was simply designed, built and put into place to help facilitate the canal. Once the canal was stopped, there was no purpose for this dam. However, it did create a pool behind it. Let's see if there's the next slide. You can see it's not there. You can actually see the pool off in the distance. But it created, some people call it a lake, some people call it a reservoir. I call it a pool because it's really not a lake or a reservoir. It doesn't function like a natural lake. It can't breathe. It has water quality issues. And that's why you see so many invasive plant issues like this one, which is one of the boat ramps that's blocked regularly. And there's lots of pesticides and herbicides that are sprayed out there. Since it doesn't function like a natural lake, they have to drain it every 3 to 4 years like a fishbowl. And when they do that, next slide, it exposes the legacy of the forest, the forest that was out there and the 8,000 acres of cypress. But it also uncovers some of the possibilities of what restoration could look like. For example, next slide. This is Cannon Springs. And so this is, these two pictures on the bottom are actually exposed springs during the drawdown. So you can see them when they drain it out to clean it out every 3 to 4 years, but then they fill it back up and it's covered and drowned out like you see in the top area. Not only can you see what it looks like when they do the drawdown, scientists and economists have been studying the benefits in all of the data about spring flow, water quality, temperature, as well as visitation to come up with some great projections on how meaningful this restoration could be. Has anyone been out during a drawdown? Have you seen it out during the spring? Couple folks. There's one coming up. They have their regular maintenance drawdowns happening this fall. And so December, January, February is a great time. You can actually do a field trip. We can take you all out and see this spring as well as the other springs, and you can see nature coming back to life. In addition to the spring starting to flow again during the drawdown, the trees, the cypress trees start trying to grow back. And it's really one of those bittersweet things because you can see nature trying, but then it's filled back up after the end of the drawdown. And when that happens, that causes more harm to the St. Johns River because it blocks all of the water flow going to the St. Johns for about 3 months, which is a critical time for growth for submerged grasses. So we're very concerned about that. Next slide. But let's talk about how beneficial this restoration could be. And this is on data collected during the drawdowns by the Water Management District. They project there'll be 150 million gallon addition of freshwater flow every single day in the St. Johns River. That's really important because we have too much saltwater intrusion. That water's clearer, it's cooler in the summertime, it's warmer in the wintertime, so it aids for better water quality. That will help revitalize the 100-mile St. Johns River estuary that begins right at the confluence of where the Ocklawaha meets the St. Johns. It provides additional habitat for manatees at a time of crisis, and it will restore nearly 18,000 acres of forested floodplain because it will restore all of those trees that are lost underneath the pool, as well as all of the trees downstream from the dam in the Ocklawaha, which are not getting enough fresh water at this point. Next slide. But the other exciting thing about this project, it's not just beneficial from the environmental perspective, it's also an economic driver. The University of Florida has been studying the restoration opportunity for about 20 years as well. And they actually have gone out during the drawdowns and talked to people, get information, and they project based on that data as well as park usage and numbers that there'll be a 28% increase in visitation. Because not only will you have great fishing, you'll have more springs to go to, you'll have more opportunities for hunting, for bird watching, for camping, and so we'll create other types of visitation. There'll be a $4 million savings on repairs to the dam. That's a small number because we know that a 53-year-old dam has other issues that need to be addressed, but it'll create an $8.1 million economic impact as well as a 7.6% return on investment. And this isn't just pie in the sky numbers. This is data driven by the University of Florida. And we have those detailed reports if anyone likes to get into the economic numbers of this opportunity. You want to talk a little bit about the business case?
So you've heard about what the University of Florida says, and those are all numbers that can be backed up. And there are studies that show that. But from my personal experience, so I have lived in Willaca since 2004. My husband and I bought an old fish camp on the St. John's. It was called Wolf's Camp. It's located right downtown Willaca. And we worked on creating what we termed as 21st century fish camp. So we wanted some nice amenities that women would enjoy as well as men, so not just fishermen. And we did want to appeal to a broader base than just fishermen. This area has always had potential for economic growth. First of all, you saw the previous slides. We had steamships here. We had people touring. We had fish camps back in the 20s. We still have a vibrant area. We are the gateway to Old Florida. And we know that there is a huge economic opportunity to follow where this leads us. Imagine being able to travel from Crescent Lake, from Willaca, all the way up again to Silver Springs. Wouldn't that just be amazing? Imagine if you had water that was cleaner and clearer, that you first of all, we don't have economic opportunity if we do not have a clean river. We can kiss that goodbye if our river and our tributaries and our lakes are not clean, we don't have anything. But if we do have that, we have so much to offer here in Putnam County. So first of all, Putnam and Marion County are very ideally located. We are at ground zero. The Ocklawaha flows in just south of Willaca. Sports fishing, if you have read the papers recently, you know that we are having a problem with our eelgrass. This would be, although not the be all to solve the issue, this would go a long way in solving the issue to give us cleaner, clearer water. 150 million plus gallons of water coming from the Ocklawaha would hit the St. John's, which would come up, would end up here, would end up in daily. Did I say yearly?
No, you didn't say.
I didn't say, okay, sorry. Daily, that's a lot of water. And you can see the increased regional visitation by an estimated 28%. Now that's what they're saying. I can tell you that the river is a huge draw in this area. I can tell you firsthand because we sold that property in 2021, but we built it from the ground up. I mean, it was basically, by the time we took it over, it was mobile homes. And just a few people living there. Those were all dating back to the 70s. So there wasn't a whole lot going on there, but there is a potential for business. People love our river. They love our communities, and this would bring more people out. So we do think it would be a huge impact for Putnam and Marion counties. Of course, we're in Putnam, and my goal is to be your community advocate in Putnam. So we're mostly talking about Putnam. And then it achieves a projected 10-year return on investment. That's the number they came up with, but I can tell you, being in business and having a business and selling a business, it did achieve, we did get a return on our investment. And as much as, you know, I hated to sell it, my husband was ready, but I Still love the area. I still love Willac. I plan on being here a long, long time. I'm gonna turn it back over to Lisa. And one more thing, I missed it about the fishing, but fishermen are part of our business. It's a huge part of our business. It's not all of our business. We have so much more to offer. But if we don't have the fishermen, we're losing a huge thing. And the fishermen are finding other places to go if we don't have our eelgrass. So we've got to protect that. I'll turn this back over.
Thank you, Jessica. And I think that's something, the bottom line and the theme that's running through all this is we want to protect the bass capital of the world. If you protect your bass habitat, you're protecting the river, you're protecting the tributaries. And so I think, it's a mutually beneficial thing. Next slide. But we also want to go beyond that. We want to focus on not only the bass habitat, the environmental benefits, the economic, but also recreation. We want everyone to be able to celebrate and be proud of what's happening. And so one of the efforts to do that is having a conversation with folks on reimagining the dam. What would the dam look like with a free-flowing river through it? We're not talking about getting rid of the Rodman Dam. We're talking about breaching it and breaching out about if you go to the next slide, we'll come back to this one. If you actually just take out about 2,000 feet of the earthen dam where the historic channel ran through, you could have the free-flowing Ocklawaha, you would get the springs back, and you'd have that connection where you could get on your boat right here in Lake Crescent and go all the way up to Silver Springs. And so, but then taking the dam and all the amenities that are there, the boat ramp, the restrooms, the fishing piers, and add more to it. Have it where there's more places to fish, more places to see the forest coming back, more places for a food truck. If we know it's going to be a beautiful weekend, have some food trucks out there so you can actually take your family and take the kids to clear, so you have a splash in the splash park, and then actually see this natural wonder come back to life, but celebrate the history of the dam because it plays a role, and there's benefit to that infrastructure right there. Let's go back to the one right before it. So this is, if you see where the car is going over what looks like a bridge, that's actually the gates. So if you've been out there before, that's where the gates were when they open and the water comes through. And you could do a boardwalk where you could walk out and see the forest coming back over time, as well as have fishing piers throughout that. There's some designs where you can have more water there for different types of fishing, or have more wetlands that provide different sort of amenities. But this is something that, the community at large is looking, how can we invest in reimagining this? Let's go 2 slides forward. I'll show you some. So there's what it looks like today on the top photo. And this is what it could look like on the bottom with those boardwalks and that forest coming back. And then the next slide actually shows, a lot of people say, well, isn't it just going to be a mud hole? We don't want a big mud hole. It's 8,000 acres. And so what you'll see is right away, you have the historic forest with all the stumps that were drowned out, but you'll see the meadow coming back, and that'll attract different types of wildlife, different type of birding, hunting. It provides a pathway for the Florida panther, the Florida bear. And then in about 10 years, you'll start seeing trees coming up. They're taller than we are. And within 30 years, you'll have a mature forest canopy again. So it doesn't happen overnight, but it has different types of ecosystems and greenery and native plants and trees and wildlife throughout those different stages. There's several examples of rivers that have been brought back like this that demonstrate with photos and data that show that this will happen very quickly. And so you won't see a mud hole for too long. There are some creeks and tributaries. They'll have to do some earth moving to open up those channels. But it's very little. It's just a matter of allowing nature to take it back over. Next slide. As I mentioned just real quickly, because I know we're running out of time, but this is an important link of the Oda-O corridor. The Osceola and Ocala National Forest is part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor that's being designed up the entire peninsula to provide critical habitat for our endangered and important species in Florida. If you haven't seen the movie Path of the Panther, it's out right now. You can see it in Jacksonville at a theater or online, and it shows the path of our Florida Panthers and how they're making a comeback. And we need to have more open space for them. Next slide. And one of the critical opportunities is having more diversity of fish coming back. When the dam was put in 1968, not only did it sever the largest tributary to the St. Johns, it also severed important migratory fish patterns that blocked the migration of American shad, striped bass, American eel, and other important fisheries. And so by opening it up, not only will it increase the diversity of fish, because you'll have all of these fish going back up into the Akawaha and having and reproducing, this will help the fish in Lake George and Lake Crescent and others. And so this is something that the scientists are very excited about, because not only does the data show by opening that up, will come back, there's other restorations where they breach dam that's happened, and that's exactly what happens. The fish came back almost overnight. It's in their DNA. It is the largest element of restoring Silver Springs. Silver Springs is the largest spring in the St. Johns River, and this severs that natural connection. It also keeps manatees from going up there in the numbers they should. And so by getting more fish and more manatees into Silver Springs, it'll help restore Silver Springs. Next slide. There's 20 springs that are lost under the dam, including Cannon Springs, that we talked about earlier. Those springs will come back. And next slide, that will be the largest, that makes it the largest manatee habitat restoration at a time of crisis. Right now, when our eelgrass, next slide, is coming back, the manatees, the turtles, everything's eating it because they're all hungry. There's not enough grass to go around. After Hurricane Irma came through, the eelgrass was decimated in the St. Johns River. And by opening this up, it actually will help restore those grasses and restore our estuary, but provide more habitat for not only manatees or turtles, but if you don't have grass, you don't have bass. And so we need to get these grasses back for our bass habitat. Next slide. And this is just a summary of most of the stuff we talked about already about why it's so important to the St. Johns River. It's not just about the St. Johns River, but by reuniting these Silver Springs, the Akawaha, and the St. Johns, you restore not only those three ecosystems, but it helps get fresh water out to the South Atlantic Bight, which is one of the most important fisheries for saltwater fishing. So it's important for 4 different ecosystems. Next slide. And the last thing I think we want to cover, just from the benefit side, it reduces flood risk. The dam is 53 years old. It has significant issues, and it's also drowning out about 8,000 acres of floodplain. And so by removing the dam, not only do you get 8,000 acres of more floodplain and flood storage, so we have Ian and Nicole that will hold that water, you also don't have the risk of a huge pool behind a 53-year-old dam that if there was an unintended breach, it could flood out more than 500 homes downstream. And so it's a significant concern of the risk it causes, but also the protection that we're losing by not having the forested floodplain. Next slide. So there is a 3-part plan that's being advocated for about 60 different organizations across the state, as well as working with citizens and advocates just like you all. One is to support partial restoration, which means the breach, not taking the dam out, but just breaching it. The second is focusing on outdoor recreational infrastructure, not only around the dam itself, but having more opportunities for more access for more people. And then economic opportunities for all the businesses and small businesses that can benefit from this opportunity. And we're all working together to do that by talking to local elected officials. We're talking to our state elected officials, and then getting out to the community, whether it's having a dock party, having a conversation like this. I know Jessica and I like to talk about this wherever we go. So any opportunity to talk to more people about getting around this opportunity, and then experience the drawdown that's coming up. We're working with outfitters where you can get out on a pontoon boat. You can go on a driving tour, a flyover if you're okay with small planes to see the springs coming back. We want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to experience what this could look like during the drawdown that's happening later this year. Next slide. And with that, I just want to thank you all for the time to talk about how we can work together to reunite the rivers. This was from an event we had recently at the Azalea City Brewing in Palatka. and just excited to be getting to know more and more folks in Putnam County. I'm from a small town in Arkansas, and I tell you this, whenever I come down here, I know Jessica knows I want to stay and find a place. But I just really appreciate the opportunity. Want to open up the floor for any questions or comments that you might have at this point, and I'd like Jessica to come back up as well. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned several times the return on investment.
Yes.
What is the required investment? Who would make that investment? And is money the only obstacle to realizing this vision, or are there other things that are required as well?
So that's a great question. If you didn't hear, it was basically, we talked about the return on investment. So who's required to make that investment to get the return on investment? That's a very conservative number, and it's based just on the investment into restoration of the Ocklawaha. And so right now, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, they on the books, they say it would be about 25 million. However, it's an old number, so that number would need to be updated. So just to be, we would say it's anywhere between 45, 50 million for restoration. Those dollars would come from federal and state resources. Since there's 50 million every single year that goes to springs restoration, those dollars could be used for that. There is about 300 million in the land acquisition trust fund. That's state dollars that come from when we sell property, they all go into that fund that could be used for it. There's about 500 million for resiliency. Those dollars could be used for it. So we're not asking local governments or anyone to invest in that piece. It would be state or federal resources. The Department of Interior is looking at, they would like to invest in some of the recreational amenities. And so it would be state and federal dollars coming to Putnam and Marion County. The recreational amenities were not factored into the economic analysis. So if that was factored in, there would even be more benefit, but we want to be ultra conservative. Yes, ma'am.
Did I see a figure there that annual expenditure for maintenance is 4 billion a year?
It's plus. So what that includes are all the herbicide spraying that they have to do, as well as removing logs, taking out, and basically they have to go out and manually take out some of the plants, and there's other things that they have to incorporate, including the drawdown. There was a dam safety study that was released, gosh, was that earlier 2022? And they projected that there's about a $2.1 million investment they're doing right now, removing the logs. But they still have to do a study of the gates during the drawdown because they're not sure the condition of the gates of the dam or the lock. That will happen this drawdown to come.
And that's underneath.
That's underneath the water.
Yeah, that's underneath very bottom.
Right. And so what they're projecting is during the drawdown to bring on a certified hydraulic steel engineer to see the true condition, because we know there's signs of corrosion of the gates, but we don't know to what degree.
So basically, for what you spend every year, what the state spends every year for maintenance, in 10 years, that would be 80% of the cost of restoration.
Yes, I can't do math in my head, but I trust you, Lisa. But it is the maintenance adds up, and every year that the dam as well as the pool gets older, there's more maintenance issues that's happened.
They've not operated locks too, right?
And the locks as well. In fact, the locks, the Buckman lock, and I didn't have an image of that, but there are significant maintenance issues there. They have to have a manatee protection system that failed this year, and 2 manatees were killed, and they had to do some repairs to that, so it hasn't been open as much. But there's on the good side, there's also a design to reimagine the lock system in the park that's there into an outdoor center. So you could take your grandkids and you could go put your boat in. They're looking at having some areas for fishing. But so instead of making any of this stuff that's out there obsolete, trying to turn it into something that is a benefit to the surrounding community as well as visitors. Do you have any answer?
Yeah, it seems that there's a strong economic argument for doing this, and that there's pools of funding perhaps readily available. So what is the point of resistance that has to be overcome to make this happen? The county commission.
How long have you lived here?
No, I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
Well, you want to take that one? Well, in part of it, you know, everyone, there, you grew up fishing on Rodman Pool, you'd want to protect.
In the middle.
You know, I get that. If I fished there with my grandfather, I would too. But, and we would not be having this conversation if it functioned as a natural lake, but every day it's out there, it's hurting all of these springs as well as the St. Johns River. And during the drawdown, they have to clean it out. It even hurts our river and spring even more. So once all this information came out, we realized this is so important to do. The science is clear, the economics are clear, but there's a long-standing position of Putnam County to save Rodman. And so we've been working to change that conversation by working with people to talk about what could be, not what will be lost, but also being respectful of what will be lost to some people and trying to figure out, like, how can that loss be mitigated with other opportunities? And we're really happy to say in Putnam County, there was a scientific poll done of most likely voters, and 74% of people in Putnam support restoration and the benefits to the St. Johns River. But that
Democrats and
it was Democrats and Republican, and we had the poll if anyone likes to look at the numbers, but it hasn't made its way to the political leadership yet.
One thing.
Like make fish, or do they get in?
I'm sorry, I said?
They have to add fish, like. Fish pools, or is it something?
No, I mean, it is arguably a good habitat for largemouth bass, but it's a monoculture. It's not helping the other type of fish in diversity because you need other fish that migrate up there. And so, and it kind of connects, you know, it collects them because of all of the stumps and everything there. But what it's doing, it's hurting all the other bass habitat in the St. Johns River because we're not getting that spring flow when the river needs it. And the migratory fish will come back. They say they'll come back a good time. They still try to come up there today. They just can't get through there this time.
One thing that really resonated with me when I heard it described as a fishbowl, it's like a fishbowl or not an aquarium that has a filtration system, but a fishbowl that you might have that you have to change the water every few days. It's very similar to that because that's why they have to do those drawdowns. All of the sediment goes down, they have to clean it out. So it is not sustainable whatsoever. And one thing that I also have recently learned is during the drawdown, they're withholding all of that water from the river. So the natural flow of the St. Johns is decreased because it doesn't have all that water coming in from the Ocklawaha. And they also do that during hurricane season. So right before Ian, they don't let water out. They do let water out. So at the very time that Willaca does not need any more water, they're letting out water to take the pressure off the dam, which is understandable, but they are letting that water, and it goes right to Willaca. And if you notice one of the last slides, that was a picture of Willaca. That's not necessarily the area that would be affected, but there are areas in Willaca that you have seen in the paper that are very, very low lying and would definitely be affected. So in the times that we need the water, they're keeping the water back from the flow, and then the times that we don't need the water, they're letting it out. So that's a huge detriment to the river. And if they're keeping the water out of the river, that's decreasing the flow into the ocean. You can imagine what's happening with the ocean, the salt water coming into the river. It doesn't really hit us down here as badly, but then the lower end of the river is really getting affected by that.
If they were to breach the dam, all that land that is covered, would that be state property? I'm assuming.
Yes, it's a combination of state and national forests. Part of that pool is in the national forest system and part of it's state ownership. There's one little skinny part that's privately owned. And there's a land trust talking to them right now because it's such an important part of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And those maps are available too. There's lots of information. If anyone's interested in getting deeper into the conversation or seeing some of these studies, we can make those available. I was blown away just by preparing the historical part because the history is so rich. It was real exciting to hear more about, just what it was like before the dam. Any other questions? Yes. do you have a question?
So I'm scratching my
Oh,
Yeah, when the sport was law was first built as a boys' school.
Oh.
In North Carolina. It's got information. Well, eventually we'll get to.
Fine, what you're going. Any other questions or comments?
Do you have a particular champion right now? Piece of legislation?
Legislators.
It's right, there's a lot of support in both the administration as well as in the legislature, but they're still looking at it as a local issue. And so until Putnam County says we want this done, it's kind of stagnant. We believe this year with the drawdown happening, that's such an exciting time when people are coming here, that we're seeing it really demonstrates what it could be like, that could be the magic moment where all the stars align.
How do we find out about this?
We're gonna be working on that and make sure that all of you know about what's happening. The prime time will start to get out there in December. We'll be making legislative visits to all the legislators. We've been talking to all the ones in the Northeast Florida area. The challenge is it's always been looked at, you just look at the pool itself in the dam area. This conversation is different. When you look at it regionally and how it impacts the Springs and the St. John's and the Atlantic, then it makes it more important to Florida, just like the Everglades is to South Florida. And then this will be a huge, game changer for this part of the state as far as the St. John's River is concerned, which most of the St. John's River in Northeast Florida flows through Putnam County. But we'll make sure we get all of that drawdown information and we can do something, with you all as a group or individuals, but it's a real exciting time because you literally see nature healing itself. We have lots of information in the back too that summarizes everything that we share. We'll leave that with you. I know Jessica's got to run to another meeting, but we are just so thankful for the opportunity to visit with you all today. And thanks to you for your interest, your attention, and we hope to get out on the water with you all soon. So thank you so much.